Big news, very important. There's been a lot of bad news lately, but when it comes to information pertaining to the Republican Party, the news has been almost entirely good. As I've said many times before, fascists are just not competent governors. And as a consequence of that, we're seeing a kind of crumbling downfall. A general rule, if you're a fascist and you want to take power, is make sure you have complete power before you're asked to make any decisions. Because once you start making decisions, it becomes really, really, really obvious how bad you are at making them. This was a key mistake the Trump administration made. Following from one of the big mistakes, January 6th, we have a piece of news from one of the court cases, or one of the charges being brought against Donald Trump. Namely, and this is very juicy, ex-Chief of Staff Mark Meadows has been granted immunity from Jack Smith. Now, I don't know how many crime movies you've watched, but when a witness is given immunity, which is a big bargaining chip, actually, it's not a big bargaining chip, it's the largest bargaining chip. There is literally no bargaining chip larger than immunity. It's usually in exchange for something good. Now, Jack Smith, based on what we know from the indictment, already has an enormous amount of information pertaining to Trump and January 6th. Like, Jack Smith was not starved for evidence right away. A lot of the evidence that he held was just already in the bank. So what did he get from Mark Meadows that was so good he was willing to trade immunity for it, is the question. That's pretty juicy. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer, and I won't pretend to know more than I do about this specific subject. I'll continue to pretend that I know more about stuff like game design and the energy consumptive habits of Finland. But this seems pretty meaningful. You saw that like 3 of his lawyers flipped and pled guilty this week in the Georgia case. Don't you spoil the rest of this segment. You buffoon, you fool, you silly Billy. Don't the lawyers have to agree to the immunity before actually learning the testimony? I believe so. Otherwise, why give the immunity? If they said we might or might not give immunity after hearing the testimony, that they already heard the testimony, right? I don't really know. I'm sure there are specifics in either direction. Whatever the case may be, the fact that this was offered is a big deal, you know? Now, of course, Mark Meadows isn't exactly the fish that Jack Smith is after, so it's not like he granted immunity to somebody directly involved in the insurrection in the same way that, say, Trump was, or I don't know, Rudy Giuliani, someone really close like that. Still, it's a pretty big deal. Trump has called Meadows, one of the former president's closest and highest-ranking aides in the White House, a special friend and a great chief of staff, as good as it gets. So, yeah, the descriptions of what Meadows allegedly told investigators shed further light on the evidence Smith's team has amassed as it prosecutes Trump for allegedly trying to unlawfully retain power. Sources told ABC News Smith's investigators were keenly interested in questioning Meadows about election-related conversations he had had with Trump during his final months in office, and whether Meadows actually believed some of the claims he included in a book he published after Trump left office, a book that promised to, quote, correct the record on Trump. ABC News has identified several assertions in the book that appear to be contradicted by what Meadows allegedly told investigators behind closed doors. According to Meadows' book, the election was, quote, stolen and, quote, rigged, with help from, quote, allies in the liberal media who ignored, quote, actual evidence of fraud right there in plain sight for anyone to access and analyze. But, as described to ABC News, Meadows privately told Smith's investigators that, to this day, he had yet to see any evidence of fraud that would have kept now President Joe Biden from the White House, told him he agrees with government assessment at the time, blah, blah, blah. So basically, so much of this case against Trump really comes down to what extent did Trump know that he was lying? And it seems like Mark Meadows, who was a key ally of Trump, probably had a lot of interesting conversations with Trump. We can probably glean a lot from their engagements, namely, ideally, evidence that Donald Trump knew that he was lying, which already seems to be present, but the more you can mount up, the better a case you can make for the jury. Trump's statement about Mark Meadows flipping on Truth Social. Oh, brilliant. I haven't seen this. I love my witness tampering. I don't think Mark Meadows would lie about the rigged and stolen Stalin 2020 presidential election merely for getting immunity against persecution by deranged prosecutor Jack Smith. But when you really think about it, after being hounded like a dog for 3 years, told you're going to jail for the rest of your life, your money, your family will be forever gone. Holy shit, this is really rambly. This doesn't have the same kind of Trump energy that I normally associate with the guy. Some people would make that deal, but they are weaklings and cowards and so bad for the future of our failing nation. I don't think that Mark Meadows is one of them, but who really knows? Make America great again. That's interesting. I don't think Mark Meadows is one of them, but who really knows? Why would he suggest Mark Meadows hadn't flipped after being given immunity? That's a pretty clear indicator that he has. Why would he deny? Don't you think that's interesting? What that says to me is that Mark Meadows was close enough to Trump that he has trouble believing that Mark Meadows would flip on him. I mean, he published a book after Jan 6 saying that the election was stolen. Seems like this is information that Trump didn't really have, like not someone he could easily like wave him away, you know? It could be performative by Trump. I'm sure it is to a large extent, but I think it maybe to some extent as well indicates a surprise. I mean, Mark Meadows flipping is a pretty big deal. As was pointed out in chat earlier, the filthy spoilers, we also have more people flipping. Former Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis pleads guilty in Georgia case. Pleads guilty! Whew. In the Georgia election subversion case and will cooperate with Fulton County prosecutors. The third guilty plea in the past week. So as you remember, the Georgia charges included a bunch of people. Remember? It was like a ton of people who were associated. The fact that people are already pleading guilty, by the way, is insane. As you guys probably know, the American criminal justice system is really heavily skewed towards either taking a plea deal, so pleading guilty to a lower charge, or going to trial and fighting it out forever. Almost always that's the direction these things take. And plea deals are by far the more common of these options, So in this case, at an unscheduled hearing in Atlanta, Ellis pleaded guilty to one count of aiding and abetting false statements, a felony stemming from the election lies that Ellis and other Donald Trump lawyers peddled to Georgia lawmakers in December 2020. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay $5,000 in restitution. That's pretty harsh as deals go, The fact that they're falling like this, they didn't even plead no contest, which is normal for lower charges. Yeah, the fact that they're going for this rather than holding out makes me think that there's a lot of hopelessness behind the scenes for the people who have been rounded up in this charge. Like, think about it. Usually what happens when these like conservative conspirators get charged or like get implicated is they kind of stand together, It says a lot about the Georgia charges that even now, only a few months after they get brought out, there have been 3 people who are like, yeah, nope. It either means they feel hopeless or they're out of money. And it's really, really, really bad for everyone that they're out of money, because if they're out of money and they plead guilty, what does that mean for their testimony? It means, at the very least, the case of the people standing next to them look weaker. Like, if you have 10 people who are all charged with trying to do an insurrection, and 3 of them plead guilty, what does that say about the remaining 7? Obviously, that doesn't in and of itself implicate them legally, but it is not good. It does not make you look good. It does not inspire confidence. Yeah, the Kraken lady pled a few days ago while I was also not streaming. Sidney Powell. This woman was on national television every day for months. She was the head of the effort to subvert the election. Pleads guilty. 6 years of probation. This is how RICO is meant to work. Since everyone's being charged with a big crime, it incentivizes everyone to plead to lower charges in exchange for flipping on the mob boss. Yep. And we really, really, really want the mob boss to go down this time, don't we? Let's have Ron DeSantis and Vivek be the 2 Republican frontrunners up against Biden in 2024, huh? Yeah, it's not looking good for Trump. It's looking really good for us. I didn't expect people to plead guilty this early. Again, I think this is largely a product of them running out of money. Somebody in chat just said, Jenna Ellis raised $200,000 to fight the charges shortly before pleading guilty. Yeah, again, I've said this before, but one of the problems with trying to defend yourself in this context is that the lawyers are really expensive. You can't have public defenders, not for something like this. You need lawyers who are willing to work with pretty openly corrupt people, and that usually means you are paying your lawyers to lie for you, something that lawyers generally don't want to do because it implicates them if they're found out to have lied as well. Essentially, they want criminal lawyers. Yeah, and those lawyers are expensive. And if they run out of money, I do think it's very funny that she pled guilty after raising the money. Did you see this opens Trump up to be rolled on harder by Sidney Powell because she no longer has to respect attorney-client privilege? Is that true? Trump claims Sidney Powell was never his lawyer after her plea deal. Why would he say that? Why? Would that actually potentially remove attorney-client privilege? Like, is that like the funny meme haha guess, or is that like a real possibility that he's waiving that right? The privilege is not absolute. It can be circumvented by what is known as the crime fraud exception if the communications are shown to be in furtherance of a crime. If this ends up being cited is as part of an argument to waive attorney-client privilege between Trump and Sidney Powell, and then like information from between them gets ousted. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm hard enough, okay? I'm gonna pop. We gotta move on. It's too good. Watching the downfall of the Republican Party because fascists are too incompetent to clean their tracks up properly and stand in unity. This is what happens when you try to do a criminal conspiracy, but every single person involved in the criminal conspiracy is A, 50 IQ, and B, purely in it for their own money. There's no shared ideology. There's no like sense of loyalty. There's no real command structure. It's literally just it's Trump and everyone like Trump. Just narcissistic losers who are looking to everyone around them over for money. No real values. And as a consequence, they fall like dominoes as soon as it becomes mutually disadvantageous for them to continue to like hold their shoulders together, you know? Yeah, grifter conspiracy, like everyone falls, right? If the GOP loses in 2024, they're done. I don't want to make a claim quite that sweeping, but I really do feel like 2024 is their last option. Whether they do it like violently, like January 6th, but winning, or whether they do it, you know, through electoral means, Trump can't run in 2028 if he loses again. He is too old. And the Republican Party can't match his energy with anyone else. Not even close. It's too much of a cult of personality. I really feel like this is their last chance. And keep in mind, animals get desperate when they're backed into a corner, okay? We need to be prepared for what might actually be the most protracted and violent disinformation campaign in American electoral history. Twitter is going to be weaponized by Elon Musk for the explicit purpose of laundering conspiracies and lies from the Republican Party and promoting them to the widest possible audience. Every single lie they come up with, he will personally signal boost and defend publicly. And that's just Twitter. Like, this will happen on every single level because a lot of them know this is their last shot. We must win. We will win.